I chose you before I understood why, Clara Wells said, barefoot in a kitchen Evan Hart had never seen before, wearing his old gray sweater like it belonged to her. Evan nearly dropped the camera. In the real room, the rooftop restaurant was warm with candlelight and applause, and Clara was not barefoot. She was standing in a cream silk dress beside her fiancé while 50 people raised champagne flutes to the future. Daniel Mercer, surgeon, good son, perfect man for a mother to approve of, leaned down and kissed her forehead. Through Evan's lens, Clara smiled. Inside Evan's head, another Clara looked at him across a rain-dark kitchen and said those impossible words again. I chose you before I understood why. His thumb slipped off the record button. The camera dipped. A waiter glanced over. Evan caught the rig against his chest before it hit the edge of the dessert table, his heart punching once, hard, as if his body had been shoved from behind. Everything okay? The waiter whispered. Evan nodded because he had trained himself to nod through worse things. He had filmed brides crying in bathroom stalls, grooms hiding panic behind bourbon, mothers clutching pearls like rosaries, fathers practicing speeches they were too proud to admit mattered. He had filmed the trembling edge between promise and performance for 12 years. He had also seen what nobody else could see. The first time Evan Hart met anyone, he saw the person they would one day truly love. Not who they loved now. Not who they wanted to love. Not always the person they married or the person standing beside them under rented flowers. Sometimes it was a stranger in a hospital room. Sometimes a second wife. Sometimes a man who was not yet brave enough to leave his first life. Sometimes a child. Sometimes nobody living. Once, during a golden June wedding in Newport, he had looked through the lens at a bride and seen an old woman sitting alone on a porch, holding the bride's hand with a tenderness that made Evan stop believing love obeyed simple categories. He had rules. See, don't speak. No, don't touch. Film what is happening, not what is coming. Then Clara Wells turned her face toward Daniel's kiss, and the future showed Evan himself. He stared at her too long. He knew he did, because Clara's eyes shifted toward the camera. Not startled. Not vain. Just aware. Her gaze met the lens for 1 second, and Evan had the terrible sense that she had caught him somewhere he had no right to be. Daniel lifted his glass. To Clara, he said, and his voice carried easily through the brick-and-glass room. Who taught me that life can be quieter and still be full. People laughed softly, moved by the shape of the sentence. Clara lowered her eyes, smiling the way people smile when a compliment has missed them by an inch. Evan's hand tightened around the grip of the camera until his knuckles hurt. He had been hired to record an engagement party. That was all. He was a vendor in black, a shadow with equipment, one more quiet man paid to remember a night on behalf of people too happy, or too nervous, to remember it clearly themselves. He was supposed to collect speeches, rings, embraces, pretty footage of hands and candles and Boston rain making watercolor streaks on the windows. He was not supposed to become evidence. He forced himself to move. Wide shot of the room. Margaret Wells, Clara's mother, sitting very straight at the head table. Daniel's parents, warmly proud. Clara's friends gathered near the bar, their laughter bright and a little strained. The old brick walls sweating lightly from the rain outside and the heat inside. He adjusted focus. He breathed through his nose. The camera steadied. For 30 seconds, he was professional again. Then Clara laughed at something Daniel whispered, and the future hit again, not as a full vision this time but as a splinter. Yellow kitchen light, rain tapping glass, Clara's fingers around a chipped blue mug, his own voice saying her name with an exhaustion so intimate it felt like grief. Evan lowered the camera. He should walk out, he thought. He should refund the deposit, invent an emergency, tell his assistant to take over, leave before anyone noticed the man in the corner was shaking. But Clara's mother rose with a remote control in one hand and a polished smile that silenced the room. Before dessert, Margaret said, I hope you'll indulge me. A small screen descended from the ceiling near the windows. Clara's face changed so quickly Evan might have missed it if he had not spent his adult life watching people pretend. Her shoulders held. Her smile stayed. But her fingers, resting beside Daniel's on the table, curled inward. Daniel noticed. He covered her hand with his. Margaret turned toward her daughter with something like triumph and tenderness mixed together. "Your father would have loved tonight," she said. The room softened. Evan lifted the camera because his body knew the job even when his mind wanted out. The video began with static, then a younger Clara in a backyard somewhere, maybe 10 years old, running through sprinkler mist with a book pressed to her chest as if she had rescued it from a flood. A man's voice laughed from behind the camera. "Clara, sweetheart, books can survive water better than you can." "No, they can't," little Clara shouted, indignant and soaked. The room laughed. Adult Clara did not. The clip shifted. Clara at 16, rolling her eyes while a tall, thin man with kind eyes stood behind a birthday cake. Clara at 20, home from college, pretending not to cry while he hugged her too hard. Then one final clip. Her father, older and thinner, seated in what looked like a hospital garden. He was speaking to the camera, but his eyes drifted beyond it, as if he could see a version of his daughter arriving late. "My Clara," he said, his voice softened by poor audio and illness. "You'll want to build a life out of wild ideas. I love that about you. But I hope you marry someone who makes you feel safe enough to rest. Someone who doesn't make love feel like a storm you have to survive." A woman near the bar sniffed. Daniel's mother pressed a napkin to her lips. Margaret watched Clara, not the screen. When the video ended, the room applauded in that careful way people do when they are touched but also relieved someone else's grief has been packaged with music and clean edits. Margaret stepped behind Clara's chair and placed both hands on her daughter's shoulders. "And she has," Margaret said, voice trembling beautifully. "She found exactly that." Daniel squeezed Clara's hand. Clara smiled up at her mother. Evan saw the moment her hand went slack beneath Daniel's. It lasted less than a second. A tiny release. A surrender or a refusal, he could not tell. But the camera caught it. Of course it did. Cameras were crueler than memory. They preserved the part people hoped had passed too quickly to count. Clara rose a few minutes later and excused herself toward the back hallway. Evan told himself not to follow. He followed because he needed a shot of the private toast being set up near the kitchen. That was the excuse. It even sounded practical inside his head, which made it worse. The service hallway smelled of butter, rain-damp wool, and dish soap. Clara stood near a half-open kitchen door, one hand pressed against the wall, her eyes closed. She looked less like a woman escaping joy than someone trying not to be ungrateful for it. Evan turned back. "You're the videographer," she said without opening her eyes. He stopped. "Guilty." She opened her eyes then. Up close, she was not as polished as she had seemed from across the room. A few strands of dark hair had slipped from the loose knot at her neck. Her lipstick had faded at the center. There was a small scar near her left eyebrow, pale and almost hidden. "Do people always behave like this at engagement parties?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like they're attending the final scene of a movie they already decided they liked." Despite himself, he smiled. "Usually there's more crying and worse music." "That bad?" "I once filmed a best man rap the entire story of the couple's relationship." Clara stared at him. 6 minutes, Evan said. "Oh no." There was a chorus. She laughed, and it was the first sound she had made all night that seemed to belong completely to her. Then the laugh faded. She glanced toward the party. "You must be able to tell." "Tell what?" "You film weddings." "Engagement." "All of it." She folded her arms, but not defensively. More like she was holding herself together. "Do you know when two people are actually going to be happy?" Evan looked at the floor because he had once answered a question like that honestly, and his family had never recovered from the sound of it. "No," he said. Clara studied him. He added, "The lens only sees what people are willing to show it." "That sounds like something you've said before." "It's useful. People like useful lies." "Is it a lie?" He met her eyes. The kitchen clattered behind them. Someone shouted for more plates. Rain tapped the old windows at the end of the hall. "It's 1:30, he said. Clara's face changed again, not dramatically. Just enough. Like a door inside her had opened a crack and she was surprised by the cold air. Before she could answer, Daniel appeared at the hallway entrance. "There you are," he said relieved. They're about to cut the cake. His smile included Evan politely, then dismissed him. Clara stepped away from the wall. Of course. Daniel placed a hand at the small of her back, careful and practiced. Clara let him guide her. Evan remained in the service hallway until both of them disappeared into candlelight. He did not sleep that night. His studio was on the second floor of an old leather factory in Somerville, above a furniture repair shop and beside a ceramicist who played jazz too loudly in the afternoons. At 1 in the morning, the building settled and clicked around him while he loaded footage onto 3 drives, labeled the project Mercer_Skulls_engagement, and tried not to look at Clara's face. He failed. On the monitor, Clara turned toward Daniel. Clara smiled at her mother. Clara lowered her eyes during the video of her father. Clara stood in the hallway asking if he could tell whether people would be happy. Every time he paused on her face, the rain-dark kitchen returned. He saw the curve of her shoulder under his sweater. He saw steam rising from the mug in her hands. He saw her not as a bride, not as a client, not as a woman promised to someone else, but as someone who had been awake too long and had finally stopped pretending. I chose you before I understood why. Evan shoved his chair back so hard it hit the metal filing cabinet behind him. No, he said aloud. The room did not care. He rubbed both hands over his face. He was 35 years old enough to distrust all, old enough to know that longing often borrowed the language of destiny when it wanted permission to be selfish. He had built an entire life around not letting what he saw become what he did. The first vision had come when he was 7. His mother had been kneeling in the front hall, tying his sneakers, her hair falling forward in the lavender smell of the shampoo she used back then. A man had come to the door to fix the upstairs radiator. Evan had looked at him, and for 1 second the hallway had vanished. He saw his mother standing in a white kitchen that was not theirs, laughing with the radiator man's hand resting on the back of her chair. When the hall returned, Evan had said, "Mommy loves him." His mother went still. The radiator man pretended not to hear. His father, Russell, standing in the doorway with a coffee mug, heard every word. Children say strange things. Adults tell themselves this until the strange thing lands exactly where they are afraid to look. His mother did not leave that day. She did not even leave that year. But something entered the house with Evan's sentence and sat at their table. His parents lowered their voices behind doors. His father stopped touching his mother casually when he passed her at the sink. His mother cried in the laundry room once and told Evan she had allergies. By the time she moved out, Evan was 9 and had learned 2 things with the permanent clarity of childhood. He could see the thing people were not ready to know, and saying it aloud could ruin a life. He never told anyone again. By 15, he understood the visions were not limited to romance. By 20, he understood they were not always immediate. By 28, filming his first wedding season, he understood he had chosen the worst possible profession for a man with his curse and the only possible one for a man addicted to evidence. Weddings gave him faces. Faces gave him futures. Futures taught him silence. He became excellent at looking calm. At 3 in the morning, he selected the clip of Clara's hand going slack under Daniel's. He hovered over the delete key. It was too private, too revealing, too dangerous. He did not delete it. Instead, he marked it in the edit with a small red flag and closed the program. The next morning, Clara Wells emailed him. "Hi Evan. Thank you for last night. Daniel and I realized we never filmed a proper interview for the wedding video. Would you be able to come by the bookstore sometime this week? Clara." He stared at the message until his coffee went cold. He should say no. He replied before he could become a better person. Beacon Hill had a way of making rain look curated. Wet brick, black railings, narrow sidewalks, window boxes gone brown at the edges. Clara's bookstore sat on a corner below a small apartment, its sign painted by hand, Wells and Weatherby Books, though Evan learned within 5 minutes that Weatherby had been Clara's father's childhood dog and not a partner, investor, or historical figure. It sounded established, Clara said, leading him inside. Banks like established. Did it work? No. But customers like dogs. The shop smelled of paper, espresso, and old heat from radiators that clanked like they were haunted. A young woman with silver glasses worked the front counter, arguing gently with an elderly man about whether mystery novels counted as comfort reading. Clara moved through the space, touching things as she passed: the edge of a display table, a crooked bookmark, the shoulder of a chair. Not tidying exactly. Checking that the place was still there. Evan noticed and wished he hadn't. They set up on the second floor among overstock boxes and 2 armchairs facing a rain-streaked window. Downstairs, the espresso machine hissed every few minutes. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap. "You don't have to make this profound," Evan said as he adjusted the tripod. "Most couples just tell the story of how they met, say something kind, try not to look terrified." "I am trying not to look terrified." "That's already more honest than most." She smiled, but her fingers tightened. He started recording. "Tell me how you and Daniel met." "At a fundraiser for Boston Children's," she said. "I was there because a friend dragged me. Daniel was there because he actually belongs at fundraisers." "People can belong at fundraisers?" "Some people look natural holding tiny plates." "And you?" "I dropped a shrimp tail into my purse." Evan laughed before he could stop himself. Clara relaxed half an inch. "What did you notice about him first?" he asked. "That he didn't make me feel stupid for hating the event. He found me hiding near a potted ficus and asked if I wanted to see the least flattering portrait in the building. There was a hallway full of donors. One man looked like his own angry grandfather. Romantic." It helped. Evan watched her through the monitor, where people often became more honest because the camera felt like a confession booth they could blame later. "When did you know Daniel was the one?" Clara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Downstairs, someone laughed. A bus hissed along the wet street below. Evan waited, because waiting was sometimes the only decent thing a person could do. Clara looked toward the window. "Maybe I didn't," she said. "Maybe everyone else did." Evan stopped recording. She looked back at him quickly. "I'm sorry. That was not usable." "No," he said. "It was just not rehearsed." A faint flush rose in her cheeks. "There's a difference?" "In my experience, yes." She stood and moved to the bookshelves along the wall. "Daniel is good. I need you to understand that. He is genuinely good." "I didn't say he wasn't." "People assume doubt means there must be some obvious villain. There isn't." She pulled a loose thread from her sleeve. "He remembers my mother's appointments. He sends soup when I'm sick. He calls the landlord when the ceiling leaks because he says I sound too angry on the phone and someone's going to hang up on me." "Do they?" "Only once." Evan smiled. She did not. "My father died 5 years ago," she said. "My mother became very practical after that. Or maybe she always was and grief made me notice. Daniel is the sort of man who makes practical people exhale." "And you?" Clara touched the spine of a book without pulling it out. "I've been trying to exhale on schedule." Evan knew the exact moment he should pack up. Instead he said, "That sounds exhausting." Clara turned. Her eyes were too bright, though she was not crying. "Yes," she said. "It does." The bell downstairs rang. A man's voice called, "Clara?" Her body changed before Daniel reached the stairs. Her shoulders lifted. Her mouth found its public shape. Daniel Mercer came up carrying 2 coffees in a cardboard tray. In daylight without engagement party glow, he was even more intimidatingly decent. Tall, clean-shaven, with tired eyes and an expensive coat he wore as if he had forgotten he owned it. He kissed Clara's cheek, handed her a coffee, and nodded to Evan. "How's it going?" "Good," Clara said. "Painful," Evan said. Clara shot him a look and almost smiled. Daniel glanced between them. "That sounds like filmmaking." "It can be," Evan said. Daniel set his own coffee on a box and walked to the window. "This place always looks beautiful in the rain." Clara's expression softened. "It leaks in 3 places." "Beautifully," Daniel said. It was a good answer. Evan disliked how good it was. Daniel turned to Clara. "I talked to Marcus." Clara's smile faded. "He thinks we could list the shop assets separately from the lease if you decide to let the space go after the wedding," Daniel said, carefully. "You would not have to rush. But it might be smart to start before winter bills hit." Evan busied himself with a lens cap. Clara held the coffee with both hands. I'm not closing the store. I didn't say closing. I said exploring options. You said assets. Daniel sighed, but gently, like a man refusing to be dragged into an unnecessary fight. Clara, you work 70 hours a week to keep a business alive that pays you less than minimum wage. After the wedding, you could move into my place, eliminate your rent, take a breath, think about what you actually want. This is what I want. Is it? Or is it what you think you have to keep because your father loved it? The room became very quiet. Clara looked down at the coffee. Evan saw the tremor in her thumb. Daniel immediately softened. I'm sorry. That came out wrong. No, Clara said. It came out clear. I just don't want you to spend the next 10 years proving you can survive on your own. Her eyes lifted, and for one strange second she looked at Evan. Not for rescue. Maybe not even consciously. More like she wanted to know whether the sentence had sounded the same to someone else. You don't have to keep proving you can survive on your own. Evan said nothing. Daniel touched Clara's arm. I have to get back. Dinner with my parents tomorrow? I remember. He kissed her again, this time on the mouth. She let him. Then he left, the bell downstairs ringing lightly behind him. Clara stood still for a moment after he was gone. He's not wrong about the bills, she said. I didn't say he was. You have a very irritating habit of not saying things. I've worked hard on it. That got a small laugh from her, but it broke quickly. Evan picked up the camera bag. We can reschedule the rest. No, she inhaled and sat back down. Ask me again. What? The question. He knew which one she meant. He should refuse. A good man would refuse. A wise man would refuse. Evan turned the camera back on. When did you know Daniel was the one? He asked. Clara looked into the lens for a long time. I knew, she said slowly, that if I chose him, everyone who loved me would be able to sleep. Evan did not stop recording this time. That night, while cutting together the bookstore interview, Evan saw Daniel's future. It happened when Daniel crossed the top of the stairs on screen, coffee tray in hand, face turned toward Clara with that mixture of affection and concern Evan had seen in dozens of men who loved someone partly by trying to manage the world around her. The studio vanished. Daniel stood in a hospital corridor years from now, older, his hair threaded with gray. Beside him was a woman in blue scrubs, a doctor Evan did not know. She leaned against the wall, exhausted, laughing at something Daniel said under his breath. He looked at her as if he had finally found someone who understood the language he had been speaking all along. There was warmth there. Not betrayal. Not scandal. A future that looked almost kind. Then Evan was back in his chair, staring at Daniel frozen on the monitor. He pushed away from the desk and stood. This was the trap. He recognized it immediately because it opened inside him with the smoothness of logic. Daniel will be fine. Clara will be fine. You have seen where this goes. Maybe you are not interfering. Maybe you are refusing to delay everyone's real life. He gripped the edge of the desk until the thought passed. It did not pass. It changed shape. He imagined telling Clara, not everything, just enough. Daniel is not your future. You don't have to marry him. The life everyone wants for you is not the only one. He imagined her anger, then relief, then the dangerous intimacy of being the man who handed her a door. He hated himself for how much he wanted that. So he did what he had done since childhood. He made the secret heavier and carried it alone. A week later, Clara called him from the bookstore. I need one more thing, she said. Most clients say that at least 6 times. I'm trying to be efficient. That was your one. My mother found a photograph my father kept of a place in Maine. I thought maybe it could go into the wedding video. Or not the wedding video exactly. Maybe just something. I don't know. Could you come by? He looked at the edit on his screen, the version that made her and Daniel look serene, inevitable, safe. I can come by. You sound like you're agreeing against your better judgment. I do most things against my better judgment. Good, Clara said. Then you'll fit right in. She had the photograph waiting when he arrived. It showed a weather-beaten house on a rocky stretch of Maine coast, gray shingles, red door, a crooked sign that read Captain's Rest. Behind it, the ocean was caught mid-glitter in old film grain. My father and I stayed there one summer when I was 12, Clara said. It was a boarding house then. The owners were ancient. I thought everyone over 40 was ancient, so they were probably 52. Brutal. I was a judgmental child. I'm shocked. She smiled down at the photograph. He wanted to buy it someday. Turn it into a bookstore where people could come in wet from the beach and ruin the floors. That was the dream? Part of it. The rest involved chowder, bad poetry readings, and a shelf for books people were embarrassed to love. Important shelf. Very. She opened an old ledger on the counter. Between pages of faded accounts and her father's looping handwriting was a newer printout. It's for sale again. Evan looked at her. Clara kept her eyes on the paper. It's absurd. I know. The roof probably needs replacing. The town is too small for a profitable bookstore. I can barely keep this one breathing. Daniel thinks it's grief wearing a costume. What do you think? She laughed once. I think I have been giving intelligent answers to that question for so long I don't trust any of them. Evan lifted the camera but did not turn it on. Clara leaned against the counter, the photograph between them. When I talk about it, I feel like I can breathe. That seems like useful information, right? Yes. You said that too quickly. Sometimes things are simple. She looked at him then, surprised by the bluntness. For a moment, he saw the kitchen again, but weaker now, less like fate and more like a bruise he kept pressing. Clara in his sweater. The sentence that had undone him. He set the camera down. What? She asked. Nothing. That's not nothing. That's your face when you're swallowing a whole paragraph. You don't know my faces. I own a bookstore. I read professionally. He laughed despite everything. Her smile faded as she studied him. Do I make you uncomfortable? Yes, he said before he could choose something safer. The answer landed between them. Clara did not move. Because I'm getting married? Yes. And because. Evan felt the room tilt toward confession. Downstairs, a customer dropped a stack of books. The sound saved him. Because you ask questions you already know matter, he said. Clara accepted that, though he could tell she knew it was not the whole answer. His phone rang before she could press. The hospital's name appeared on the screen. For 2 seconds he was a boy again, standing in a hallway with an impossible truth in his mouth. I have to take this, he said. His father's voice had always sounded too solid to fail. Even when Russell Hart grew older and thinner, even when his hair went white and his hands shook slightly around coffee cups, his voice remained dry, restrained, practical. He was a retired high school history teacher who believed most disasters could be improved by sitting down, reading the instructions, and not making dramatic declarations before breakfast. But when Evan arrived at Massachusetts General, Russell looked small inside the hospital bed. Don't look at me like that, Russell said. Like what? Like you're filming a tragedy. Evan sat beside him. I'm not filming. But I haven't shaved. The doctor had said heart rhythm irregularity, monitoring, tests, not catastrophic yet. Evan heard all the soft words that mean everyone is trying not to promise anything. Russell watched him from the pillow. You drove too fast. You don't know that. You have the face. My faces are apparently legible. Only the bad ones. For a while they talked about medication, insurance, whether Russell had remembered to lock the back door. Ordinary things. Safe things. Then Russell asked Evan to bring clothes from his house. Top drawer, he said. And not the blue sweater. It makes me look like a sad substitute teacher. You were a sad substitute teacher. I was full-time. That was the tragedy. At his father's house in Medford, Evan found the drawer, the sweater he was forbidden to bring, and a cardboard box in the closet marked home videos in his mother's handwriting. He stood there longer than he meant to. Then he opened it. The first tape was labeled Evan's 6, Summer. The second, Christmas. The third had no label. He took that one back to the hospital along with socks, pajama pants, and the least depressing cardigan he could find. You went through the closet, Russell said when Evan returned. I got your clothes. You found the tapes. Evan said nothing. Russell looked toward the window. Afternoon light lay flat and gray against the glass. Your mother sent some of those back after she moved to Oregon. I never watched them. Why keep them? Russell's mouth twisted. People keep things for all kinds of stupid reasons. Evan set the bag on the chair. I thought I did it, he said. Russell closed his eyes. I thought if I hadn't said anything, she might have stayed. Evan. I was 7. I know. I saw her with him before anything happened. Russell opened his eyes then, and what Evan saw there was not anger. That was worse. It was regret that had been sitting in the room for 28 years waiting for both of them to become tired enough to face it. Your mother and I were already gone, Russell said quietly. Not legally. Not practically. But we had stopped looking at each other long before that. Evan's throat tightened. I said it, and after that? After that, we couldn't pretend you hadn't, Russell said. That's different. Evan looked down at his hands. You were a child, Russell said. You thought you saw the ending. We were adults. We had written most of it already. Evan laughed once, without humor. You never told me that. You wouldn't talk about it. You didn't either. No, Russell turned his wedding ring, which he still wore though Evan's mother had remarried twice. I was ashamed. Not because you knew. Because you knew and I had been pretending not to. The machines beside the bed clicked and breathed. Evan thought of Clara's hand going slack beneath Daniel's. He thought of Daniel's future in a hospital corridor. He thought of himself as a boy, believing truth was a weapon because adults had bled when it touched them. What am I supposed to do with things I know? He asked. Russell gave him a tired look. That depends. Are you trying to save someone? Or are you trying to be right? Evan could not answer. On Friday, he returned to the bookstore and heard Clara arguing with her mother before he reached the second floor. You are not thinking clearly, Margaret said. I am thinking about my own life, so I can see how it looks like confusion from the outside. That is not fair. No, Mom, what's not fair is acting like Daniel is some prize I won for surviving grief correctly. Evan stopped on the stairs. Margaret's voice sharpened. Daniel loves you. I know he does. Do you? Because you treat stability like it's a trap. Clara made a sound that was almost a laugh. What if stable is just another word for disappearing slowly? Silence followed. Not empty silence. Wounded silence. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had changed. After your father died, do you know what stability meant? It meant the mortgage got paid. It meant you could finish college. It meant I sat across from bankers who spoke to me like a child and did not cry until I got to the car. It meant I stopped asking what I wanted because wanting had become expensive. Mom. No. You don't get to make survival sound small because you're tired of being grateful for it. Evan turned to leave, but a floorboard creaked beneath his shoe. The voices stopped. A moment later Margaret came down the stairs. She was elegant in a camel coat, eyes bright but dry. She looked at Evan as if she knew exactly how much he had heard and had already decided he was not worth the energy of embarrassment. Mr. Hart, she said. Mrs. Wells. It's Margaret. She paused. My daughter is very impressionable when unhappy. Evan held her gaze. Most people are. She did not like that. Or maybe she did and resented him for it. Daniel is a good man, she said. I know. Good men are not as common as romantic people think. No, Evan said. They're not. Margaret studied him for another second, then passed him and left. Upstairs, Clara stood behind the counter, one hand pressed flat to the wood. She did not look at him. I'm sorry, Evan said. For overhearing or for existing during it? Both, apparently. She let out a shaky breath that might have become a laugh on a kinder day. He wanted to say something useful. He wanted to say her mother was afraid. He wanted to say Daniel's goodness did not obligate her to become smaller. He wanted to say he had seen a future in which she wore his sweater and looked at him like the whole world had become simple too late. Instead, he went downstairs, filled a paper cup with water from the cafe station, brought it up, and set it on the top stair near her. Not too close. Clara looked at the cup. Then at him. You don't have to stay, she said. I know. He started packing the equipment. She picked up the water. Evan turned. Thank you for not making this a moment. He nodded once. It already was one, but he understood what she meant. The wedding was 3 weeks away when Daniel asked Evan to meet. Not Clara. Daniel. The message was polite, concise, and impossible to misread. They met at a coffee shop near the hospital, where everyone looked either late, tired, or recently informed of something they did not want to know. Daniel arrived in scrubs under a wool coat. He had probably come between surgeries. He ordered black coffee and did not drink it. I'll be direct, Daniel said. I had a feeling. I'd like you to step away from the wedding. Evan had expected the words. They still landed. I can recommend other videographers. That would be appreciated. Daniel looked out the window. Traffic crawled under a hard gray sky. I'm not accusing you of anything. No. No, Daniel's jaw tightened. If I were accusing you, this would be a different conversation. Evan said nothing. Daniel looked back at him. Clara talks to you like she's not trying to survive the conversation. There was no defense against a sentence that true. Daniel's hand wrapped around the coffee cup. He did not lift it. I know how that sounds. Controlling. Insecure. Maybe it is. But I'm not blind. She's different since the engagement party. She may have already been different. Daniel's eyes sharpened. You think I don't know that? Evan regretted speaking. Daniel leaned back. I love her. I know that may be inconvenient for whatever story is happening in your head, but I do. I'm not trying to own her. I'm trying to build a life with her. I believe you. Do you? Yes. That seemed to disarm him more than argument would have. Daniel looked down. Then help me. Step away. Evan thought of Russell's question. Are you trying to save someone? Or are you trying to be right? I'll step away, he said. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, relief and humiliation crossing his face together. I'll send the footage, Evan added. All of it. Clara hired me too. Daniel nodded. Fair. They stood at the same time. At the door, Daniel stopped. Is it you? Evan's stomach went cold. Daniel gave a short, humorless smile. Not like that. I'm not asking for a confession. I'm asking because if it is, I need to know whether I'm fighting for my fiancé or against something that already happened before I noticed. Evan could have lied easily. He had lied by omission his whole life. I don't know what it is, he said. Daniel studied him, and Evan saw then the cost of loving someone who was slipping away without hating you enough to make leaving simple. Neither does she, Daniel said. Then he walked out into the rain. Clara came to Evan's studio that night without warning. He opened the door and found her in a dark coat, hair damp, cheeks flushed from cold or anger. She looked past him into the room where her own face was frozen on his editing monitor. Daniel said, You're quitting. I'm stepping away. That's prettier. It's also accurate. She walked inside without asking. Did he ask you to? Yes. And you said yes. Yes. Because Daniel asked? Because it's the right thing. Clara turned on him. Do you have any idea how tired I am of men calling their discomfort the right thing? The words hit him harder than she intended. He saw it in her face immediately, the flicker of regret. But she did not take them back. Evan closed the door. You're getting married in 3 weeks, he said. I'm aware. There are napkins with my name on them. That usually clarifies things. Don't do that. Do what? Make a joke and retreat behind it. I'm not one of your wedding clients you can film at a safe distance. No, he said more sharply than he meant. You are not. The room changed. Clara's anger faltered, but she held her ground. Then tell me the truth. You don't want that. There it is again. Another person deciding what I can handle. Evan turned away from her because looking at her made honesty feel like gravity. You don't understand, he said. Then make me understand. I can't. Can't or won't. He laughed once, bitterly. Both. Clara stepped closer. Did I do something? No. Did I imagine this? He turned back. Imagine what? She stared at him, furious now because he had made her say it. That you see me. Not the bookstore, not the wedding, not Daniel's future wife, not my mother's proof that everything turned out respectable. Me. Evan's restraint cracked. I see too much, he said. Clara went still. The old studio hummed around them. Pipes knocked in the wall. Rain ticked against the high windows. On the monitor, her paused face watched them both. I know you're unhappy, he said. I know you're trying to make gratitude do the work of love. I know Daniel is good and that makes it worse because if he were cruel, leaving would be easier. I know your mother thinks fear is wisdom because grief taught her to call it that. I know you want a bookstore by the sea, and every time you talk about it you look 10 years younger and terrified of being seen wanting anything that much. Clara's eyes filled. Evan heard himself breathing. And, she whispered, and I know you will love me. The words rose in him with terrifying force. They were there, ready, bright as a match. He could say them. He could hand her destiny like a key. I know because when I first looked at you, I saw you in my kitchen, wearing my sweater, telling me you chose me before you understood why. It would change everything. It would ruin everything. If she left Daniel after hearing it, she would never know whether she had chosen herself or obeyed the shock. If she married Daniel after hearing it, she would never know whether she had chosen him or tried to defeat a prophecy. Every room after that would contain Evan's sentence. Every kiss. Every doubt. Every ordinary morning. His love, if that was what this was becoming, would arrive as contamination. Clara waited. Evan swallowed. I don't know your future, he said. I only know you shouldn't need permission to want one. The disappointment on her face was small but devastating. That's very noble, she said. It's not. It sounds rehearsed. It isn't. She looked at the monitor, at herself in the bookstore interview. Do you know what the worst part is? She asked. I came here hoping you would say something unforgivable. Something selfish. Something that would let me be angry at you instead of afraid of myself. I'm sorry. I'm sorry too. She moved toward the door. Clara. She stopped but did not turn. I'm sending the full footage tomorrow. Not the pretty version. The real one. Watch it before Saturday. Why? Because it's yours. She left without answering. Evan spent the rest of the night cutting nothing. Instead, he assembled. The engagement party, including Margaret's speech and Clara's hand going slack under Daniel's. The hallway conversation where Clara asked whether he could tell who would be happy. The bookstore interview where she failed to say when she knew. The second take, where she said everyone she loved would sleep. Daniel in the bookstore, gentle and reasonable and wrong in ways that did not make him a villain. Clara with the photograph of Maine, her voice changing when she described ruined floors and bad poetry. He did not add music. He did not correct the awkward pauses. He did not remove the moments when Clara looked away. At dawn, he exported the file, uploaded it, and sent Clara the link with one message. Don't marry him because everyone can see the shape of that life. Choose it only if you can breathe inside it. Then he emailed Daniel a list of 3 videographers and formally withdrew. By evening, Boston was under a storm warning. The rain started hard after dark, blowing sideways against the bookstore windows. Clara had closed early because the street outside was flooding at the curb and customers had the sense to go home. She sat alone upstairs with a battery lantern, her laptop at half charge, watching herself try not to tell the truth. The power had gone out 20 minutes earlier. On the screen, her recorded face smiled at Evan's question. When did you know Daniel was the one? Maybe I didn't. Maybe everyone else did. She paused the video and pressed both hands over her mouth. Downstairs, someone knocked. For one wild second she thought it was Evan. She hated the hope that moved through her. Hated it enough to stand too quickly. Daniel stood outside under a black umbrella, rain shining on his coat. When she let him in, he closed the umbrella carefully, as if the floor still mattered. You weren't answering your phone, he said. It died. Of course it did. They stood among the dark shelves, the storm loud around them. Daniel looked toward the stairs. Are you alone? Yes. He heard something in her answer. Or maybe he had heard it for weeks and was finally tired of translating it into something kinder. Is it him? He asked. Clara's eyes burned. She could have said no. It would have been true enough to hide inside. Instead, she sat on the bottom step. I don't know, she said. That's the worst part. I don't even know if this is about him. Daniel absorbed it like a physical blow. She continued because stopping would be cowardice, and she had used all her cowardice planning a wedding. When I'm with Evan, I feel like I'm not being managed. But maybe that's not love. Maybe that's just relief. Maybe he's just the first person in years who didn't need me to be okay before I spoke. Daniel leaned against the counter. His face was pale. I thought I was helping, he said. I know. I thought if I could take things off your shoulders, you'd stop looking like the world was asking you to carry furniture up a hill. A laugh broke out of her, wet and painful. I loved you for that, she said. His mouth tightened. I do love you, she said. But I don't know if the love I have is marriage. I think I've been hoping the ceremony would turn it into the right kind. Daniel looked away. Rain hammered the glass. My father used to say surgery humbles people because the body doesn't care about your intentions, he said. You can mean well and still cut the wrong thing. Clara closed her eyes. I have been cutting the wrong thing, he said. Haven't I? No, Daniel. I kept trying to remove the pressure from your life. The store. The money. Your mother. The uncertainty. I thought love meant making things easier. Sometimes it does. Not if the thing I make easier is your disappearance. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. He sat beside her on the step, leaving space between them. It was one of the saddest kindnesses he had ever offered. Do you want to marry me tomorrow? He asked. Clara looked at the lantern on the floor, at the ring on her hand, at the dark bookstore that had been her father's dream and her burden and her excuse not to ask for more. I want to, she said. Daniel nodded slowly. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then he took her hand. Not possessively. Not romantically. Like a doctor checking for a pulse and finding something alive but not his to save. Then we shouldn't do this, he said. The words broke something in her, but not the way she expected. Not like collapse. Like a window opening in a sealed room. Her first thought was her mother. Her second was the guests. Her third was Evan. Her fourth, quieter than all the rest, was herself. The next morning, the rain had stopped but the city looked scrubbed raw. At the church in Back Bay, white flowers had been arranged along the aisle. Programs sat in neat stacks near the entrance. A string quartet tuned beneath stained glass. Guests arrived in dark suits and jewel-colored dresses, shaking rain from umbrellas, greeting one another with the cheerful tension of people who know weddings are expensive and emotions must therefore behave. Evan was not there. He was at the hospital, sitting beside Russell while a nurse adjusted leads on his chest. You're missing your wedding, Russell said. It's not my wedding. From what you've told me, that's debatable. I told you almost nothing. You used the word complicated 3 times. In my experience, that means a woman. Evan handed him a cup of water. Drink. Russell obeyed, then grimaced. Hospital water tastes like someone described a lake to a faucet. Evan smiled, but his phone buzzed in his pocket. He did not check it. Russell noticed. You can look. No. Very mature. Suspicious but mature. At the church, Clara stood in a small room off the nave while Margaret fastened the last button of her dress. The gown was beautiful. That seemed rude of it. Margaret's hands shook slightly. You look like your grandmother. Clara met her mother's eyes in the mirror. Margaret paused. What is it? Clara had planned sentences. She had rehearsed them at dawn in her apartment. None survived the sight of her mother behind her, older than Clara usually allowed herself to notice, eyes full of hope sharpened by fear. I can't do it, Clara said. Margaret's hands dropped. Don't, she whispered. I'm sorry. No. No, Clara, this is nerves. It isn't. Margaret stepped back as if the dress had become contagious. Do you understand what you're saying? Yes. Daniel is waiting. I know. People are here. I know. You cannot humiliate him because you're having some last-minute panic. Clara turned from the mirror. I'm not humiliating him. I'm trying not to turn both of us into a mistake. Margaret flinched. A bridesmaid knocked and opened the door halfway. "They're ready." "No," Margaret said without looking away from Clara. "They're not." But Clara walked past her. The church fell quiet when she appeared. For one strange, floating moment, everything continued as planned. The quartet began. Guests turned. Daniel stood at the front in a navy suit, his face calm and ruined. He already knew, Clara realized. He had come anyway because some things deserved to be ended with witnesses, not rumors. She walked down the aisle alone. At the front, she handed her bouquet to no one. It rested awkwardly against the first pew until one of Daniel's sisters picked it up, crying silently. Clara faced Daniel. "I care about you," she said, and her voice carried because the church was built for vows and confessions. "I care about you more than I know how to say without making this worse. But I can't turn care into marriage just because everyone came here dressed for one." Someone gasped. Margaret made a sound like her name, but it did not become speech. Daniel looked at Clara for a long time. Then he reached up and removed the small white boutonniere from his lapel. His hand trembled once. "Then let's not make each other into a mistake," he said. Clara began to cry. Not loudly. Not beautifully. Just enough that the first tear fell before she could stop it. Daniel took her hand, kissed her knuckles, and let go. At the hospital, Evan's phone kept buzzing. He kept not checking. Russell watched him with open irritation. "This is painful. Your heart. No. Your restraint. It builds character. I'm 81. I have enough character." A doctor came in, spoke in measured terms, ordered another test, and left behind the familiar hospital fog of information without certainty. Russell looked more tired after. His humor thinned. "Bring me the camera," he said. Evan looked up. "The little one in your bag." "You want me to film you?" "I want to say something while I still sound like myself." "You sound like yourself." "Evan." That was enough. Evan set up the small camera near the foot of the bed. He checked framing, focus, sound. His hands knew the ritual. For once, it did not feel like hiding. Russell looked into the lens and then at Evan. "Should I talk to you or the machine?" "Me." "The machines are terrible listeners." Evan pressed record. Russell folded his hands over the blanket. His wedding ring caught the fluorescent light. "When your mother left," he said, "I let you believe you had broken something because it was easier than admitting I had been too proud to fix it. I am sorry for that." Evan's throat closed. "I don't think the future is something you see," Russell continued. "Not really. I think it is something you forgive yourself for entering. People will love who they love. They will leave what they leave. They will stay when staying is brave and go when going is mercy. You don't control that by knowing early. You only decide whether you meet it as a coward or as a man." He breathed carefully. "And if there is someone, whoever she is, don't make her pay for what frightened you before she arrived." Evan reached for the camera, then stopped. "Let it run." Russell smiled faintly. "That's all," he said. "Now turn that off before I become profound by accident." Evan did. His phone buzzed again. This time, Russell lifted one eyebrow. Evan took it out. 3 messages from Daniel, the newest only 4 words. "We stopped the wedding." Another from an unknown number, perhaps one of the replacement videographers. Another from Clara's assistant at the shop. Evan stared at Daniel's message until the letters blurred. Russell watched him carefully. "Are you going?" Evan shook his head. "No," he said. "You sure?" "No," he put the phone face down. "That's why I'm staying." Russell smiled, tired and proud in a way that hurt. "Good answer." Evan did not call Clara that day. He did not call her the next day either. On the 3rd day, she texted him. "I'm sorry you had to find out from someone else." He wrote and deleted 6 responses. Finally he sent, "I'm glad you told the truth." She replied hours later. "Me too. Think. It's very loud afterward." He smiled sadly at that. Truth often was. The months that followed did not look like destiny. They looked like paperwork. Clara returned gifts, made apologies, endured silence from friends who did not know which side kindness required. Daniel sent one message after a week: "I hope the store survives." "I hope you do too." She cried over that longer than she expected. Margaret did not speak to her for 12 days. On the 13th, she arrived at the bookstore with soup and a face arranged into injured dignity. "You look thin," Margaret said. "You look angry." "I brought soup." "That doesn't disprove angry." Margaret set the container on the counter. "No." They stood there among new releases and unsold calendars. "I embarrassed you," Clara said. "Yes." "Ihut Daniel." "Yes." "I still couldn't marry him." Margaret's mouth tightened. "I know." That was the beginning. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a beginning large enough to sit down across from. By spring, Clara had negotiated a smaller lease for the Beacon Hill store, sold part of her father's rare collection to pay off debt, and driven twice to Maine to look at the old boarding house. The roof was bad. The floors slanted. A raccoon had claimed the back storage room with aggressive confidence. She loved it so fiercely it scared her. Evan, meanwhile, stopped taking weddings. At first he told himself it was temporary. Then he filmed a father teaching his daughter to make pancakes in a kitchen full of smoke, and something inside him unclenched. He filmed an elderly couple packing their house of 40 years, arguing over whether to keep a hideous lamp neither of them liked but both remembered buying during their first year of marriage. He filmed a single mother dropping her son at college, holding her smile until his dorm door closed. The visions still came. A father's future love was the granddaughter he had not yet met. The elderly woman's was still the man beside her, though she called him impossible 3 times before lunch. The single mother's was a quiet woman in a community garden, years away. Evan saw and kept filming. He began to understand that love was not a verdict delivered at first sight. It was 1,000 permissions, refusals, repairs, failures, returns. The visions were not maps. They were glimpses of people at their most honest. What they did with that honesty belonged to them. Russell died in early summer. Not dramatically. Not in the middle of a speech. He went after a second hospitalization, with Evan beside him and a baseball game murmuring on the television. His last words were, "Don't donate the blue sweater." "I was wrong." Evan laughed, and then Russell was gone before the laugh had finished leaving the room. At the memorial, Evan played the video Russell had made. His mother came from Oregon with her third husband, a kind man named Paul who stood near the back and looked unsure where grief expected him to place his hands. Evan hugged his mother without seeing the radiator man or the old kitchen or any future at all. Just the woman who had once tied his shoes and failed him and loved him in ways too human to be clean. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know," he said. "It was not everything. It was enough for that moment." Clara sent flowers and a card. "Your father raised a man who knows how to witness without taking over the story. I'm grateful for that." Evan kept the card in the top drawer of his editing desk and did not reply for 2 days because gratitude, from her, was more dangerous than longing. When he finally wrote back, he said he would have liked that sentence. He also would have pretended not to. She sent a laughing face, then nothing for 3 weeks. Summer passed. Boston turned humid, then golden at the edges. Clara spent more time in Maine. The old boarding house became a construction site, then a disaster, then somehow a place with shelves. She learned which contractors lied gently and which lied expensively. Margaret visited once, wearing shoes unsuitable for dust, and stood in the future children's corner with her arms crossed. "This is madness," she said. "Yes," Clara said. Margaret touched a raw wooden shelf. "Your father would have been unbearable about it. He would have named the raccoon something literary. Mr. Darcy. Too obvious." They laughed, and the sound startled both of them. In November, the first snow came early along the Maine coast. Evan found the postcard in his mail between a grocery flyer and a medical bill he had already paid. On the front was a photograph of the old boarding house, newly painted, red door bright against gray shingles. The sign now read Wells and Weatherby by the. On the back, Clara had written, "Opening day is Saturday. The projector is already making a noise that suggests moral failure. We are short one person who knows how to fix it. Also one friend." He read it standing in the hallway of his building, coat still on, keys in hand. No vision came. No kitchen. No sweater. No sentence. Only his own ordinary heart, which was not calm but was finally allowed to be uncertain. He drove north Saturday morning. The highway gave way to smaller roads, then to a coastal town with clapboard houses, a general store, and gulls behaving like unpaid actors in a film about loneliness. Snow blew in small hard grains across the windshield. Evan parked beside a stone wall and sat for a moment, watching warm light move behind the bookstore windows. He did not know what would happen. For the first time, that felt less like punishment than life. When he opened the door, a bell rang overhead. The place smelled of fresh paint, coffee, sea air, and cardboard. Half the shelves were full. Half the books were still in boxes. People moved through the rooms with paper cups and winter coats, stamping snow from their boots, laughing too loudly because new beginnings made everyone want to be useful. Clara stood near the back counter, arguing with a projector on a rolling cart. She wore jeans, boots, and a green sweater with one sleeve pushed to her elbow. Her hair was pinned badly and falling down. There was dust on her cheek. She looked up. For 1 second, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled, and it was not the smile from the engagement party, not the smile from the interview, not the smile of a woman asking permission from the room. It was nervous. "Glad. You came," she said. "You said the projector was morally compromised." "It's worse than I thought. I'll be the judge." He walked toward her through the unfinished store. A woman browsing poetry glanced at them, sensed something, and became intensely interested in a shelf of Mary Oliver. Clara touched the projector. "It keeps turning everything purple." "That's usually a cable issue or a haunting. This building has both." "Then we'll start with the cable." He crouched beside the cart. Clara crouched too, unnecessarily close, handing him cords he had not asked for. Their shoulders almost touched. It was awkward enough to be real. "I'm sorry about your father," she said quietly. "Thank you. I wanted to come to the memorial." "I know. I thought it might make things complicated." "It would have." She nodded. He plugged in one cable, unplugged another. The projector flickered, still purple. "Stubborn," Clara said. "I've met worse." "Recently?" He looked at her. She held the look for a second, then smiled down at her hands. "I didn't leave because of you," she said. "I know. I needed you to know that." "I did. I also didn't stay away because I didn't want to see you." The projector fan hummed between them. Evan sat back on his heels. "I hoped that." Clara's fingers rested on the edge of the cart. No ring now. A faint pale line remained where one had been. "I had to be sure," she said, "that I wasn't running from Daniel into another version of being chosen by someone else's certainty." "I didn't have certainty." She laughed softly. "You had something." He could have told her then. The old secret rose again, no longer a match but an ember. He could say he had seen her. He could say from the first night, Destiny had leaned across a crowded engagement party and whispered his name in her voice. But the moment did not ask for it. Maybe someday he would tell her. Maybe he would not. Maybe honesty was not the same as unloading every strange burden at the first opportunity. Maybe love began with knowing which truths belonged in the room and which could wait until both people had chairs. Clara watched him with careful openness. Evan picked up a shelf bracket from a nearby box. "Where do you want this shelf?" he asked. Her expression shifted, surprise blooming into something warmer. "That's your line." It's a good practical question. It's a wildly practical question. "I'm a useful man in a crisis." "Is this a crisis?" He looked around at the leaning boxes, the purple projector, the crooked handwritten signs, the snow blowing under the door every time someone entered. "Obviously." Clara laughed. Then she stood and walked to the far wall, where afternoon light slid through salt-streaked windows. "Here," she said. "I want this whole wall to be the shelf for books people are embarrassed to love." Important shelf. Very. He carried the bracket over. She held the shelf in place while he marked the wall with a pencil. Her hand brushed his wrist once. Neither of them moved away quickly enough to pretend they had not noticed. Outside, the sea shifted gray under the winter sky. Inside, someone called for more coffee. The projector gave one last wounded click and, behind them, cast a clean rectangle of light across the wall. Clara turned. "Oh," she said. "You fixed it." "I touched one cable." "Still counts." The first image appeared, Clara's father in the old hospital garden, smiling into a camera years ago. The room quieted as people turned toward the wall. Clara went still beside Evan. Her father's recorded voice filled the new bookstore. "My Clara," he said, grainy and warm. "You'll want to build a life out of wild ideas." Clara's breath caught. Evan stood close enough to feel her trying not to cry. On the screen, her father smiled as if he knew exactly where the sentence would land. "I love that about you." Clara covered her mouth. Evan did not touch her. Not yet. He simply stood there while the past spoke kindly into the room she had built after refusing the life everyone else had arranged. The clip ended. For a moment, nobody applauded. The silence was too full. Then Margaret, standing near the doorway in a dark wool coat, began to clap. Clara turned, stunned. Margaret's face was wet. She looked embarrassed by that and clapped harder to cover it. The room joined her. Clara laughed through tears, wiping her cheeks with both hands. Evan looked away because some things were not meant to be filmed even by a man who had spent his life trying to preserve what people missed. Later, after the crowd thinned and evening settled blue against the windows, Clara found him by the newly mounted shelf. He was arranging books badly. "You're putting Gothic romance next to baseball memoirs," she said. "Range. Chaos. Discovery." She took a book from his hand and turned it right side up. "Thank you for coming. You were short a friend." "I was. And a projector exorcist." "That too." The store was quiet now except for Margaret washing cups in the back with unnecessary force. Snow tapped at the glass. Somewhere upstairs, pipes clanked in a way that made the old building sound awake. Clara leaned against the shelf. "I used to think choosing meant being sure." Evan looked at her. "I'm not sure of much," she said. "The roof will probably leak. This town may not buy enough books to keep me solvent. My mother is pretending to hate the paint color because she doesn't know how to say she's proud. Daniel is healing, I think, but I hurt him and that doesn't disappear because I did the right thing. And you?" He waited. She smiled faintly. "You make me nervous." "Good nervous?" "Not entirely." "That sounds honest." "It is." Her gaze dropped, then lifted. "I don't want a prophecy. I don't want a rescue. I don't want to be someone's inevitable anything." Evan's heart moved strangely in his chest. "Neither do I," he said. Clara studied him as if she heard the door behind the sentence and wondered what was on the other side. "What do you want?" she asked. He thought of the engagement party, the vision, the impossible kitchen. He thought of his father's hospital bed and the camera running while Russell told him the future was something you forgive yourself for entering. He thought of all the years he had mistaken silence for goodness and distance for safety. Then he looked at Clara Wells in the bookstore she had chosen, with dust on her sweater and snow in her hair, no longer promised to anyone's idea of her. "I want to help you finish this shelf," he said. "Then I want to take you to dinner, if you want that. And after that, I want to see what we choose when nobody is telling us what it means." Clara's eyes filled again, but she smiled. That was almost smooth. "I panicked in the middle. I noticed." "Still." She reached for the next bracket and placed it in his hand. "Stay long enough," she said, "and I'll show you." Evan looked down at the bracket, then at her. The kitchen from the vision did not appear. No rain-dark window, no old sweater, no future rushing in to claim credit. Only the present. Clara's hand brushed his again, and this time neither of them pretended it was an accident. Outside, the tide moved in the dark. Inside, the unfinished shelf waited for weight. Evan lifted the bracket to the wall, and Clara stepped close beside him, choosing the height by instinct, by hope, by the small ordinary courage of wanting something without demanding that the universe guarantee it first.